This conference will now be recorded.
Now, until yesterday, we were talking about backups, we're talking about recovery of a virtual machine and etc. So we're talking things like if your virtual machine goes down, your virtual machine were to go down, then what are the tasks or what are the steps that you can take in order to protect it and etc. But let's say that I am a company like Facebook.com and Facebook finally decided to go ahead and let's say create a virtual machine on Azure, install IIS on Azure, or install IIS on this virtual machine. So they said, okay, fine, I'll install IIS and I'll put my code on top of it. So Facebook had a very good code. They put a code on top of it. And whenever Facebook was creating this particular virtual machine, one thing that we have to understand is that this virtual machine is nothing but it's provisioned from a actual server in a data center. Now you have a data center. So let's say you're creating a virtual machine in central US. So what happens really is that there is a physical server in the backend. I'm talking about a physical server that is sitting inside a data center, not one but multiple. So let's put in multiple servers out here. So when we create a virtual machine out here, we are actually creating a virtual machine or we are actually renting out some space on one of the servers, right? This is what we are doing. So we are just making sure to rent some space on one of the servers that is running, let's say that is inside a data center in a region like central US. So this is what we are doing out here. And what we did is that, okay, fine, since this is Facebook.com and I cannot afford downtime, meaning if let's say something happens to my applications or something crashes, I still went ahead and said, okay, fine, I'll configure backup, I configure, let's say, ASR and all that stuff. But let's imagine for a moment that this is a physical server, right? And there can be wear and tear. It can basically go down. The physical server also can go down because this physical server is nothing but it's a physical component that's attached to, let's say, an electricity. It has, let's say, all that supply, and someone needs to regularly update it and all that stuff, right? What if this physical server itself goes down? Again, you can argue that yes, we have the ASR concept in place, just like Azure Site Recovery, which I would say that yes, I am just putting this Azure Site Recovery for just this purpose. Again, to perform a failover to a secondary region. So I have a secondary region here, like North Europe. In order to perform a failure to a secondary region, again, it's going to take somewhere around 5 minutes. And once you perform a failure, you again need to take care of the traffic, like how the users are being diverted to this particular server. You need to understand that and you need to divert that also. So let's take another 5 minutes for that. I'm losing somewhere around 10 minutes. This server needs to come up again after I divert the traffic. That's going to take somewhere around 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm looking at around 15 minutes at least in order to get the secondary region up and running. My question now is that great, this is good, but this is not a best suit, or this is, let's say, not the best workaround for a company like Facebook, because I cannot afford, or let's say a company like Facebook, I'm talking about a company like that. There can be a lot of companies like e-commerce sites, like let's say, which needs to be 24 by 7 online without, let's say, any downtime. Because if I am doing a downtime, if let's say I have a downtime of 15 minutes, I'm losing like millions of dollars in business, right? So this is the issue. So the thing is that then why should I even basically wait for this 15 minutes? Why don't I, let's say, address this issue of the physical server going down, which is not in my hand. So this physical server again has a wear and tear, agreed. But what if I don't just create one server, I create multiple servers? I say, okay, fine, not one, but multiple servers running the same code, facebook.com, based on multiple physical servers out there. Meaning, I have one, two, three, and four servers out here. So, what if I do four virtual machines based on, let's say, four different physical servers, spin the same code, because at this point in time, cost is not a factor for me. I can go for multiple virtual machines. What is the biggest factor for me is that my business should be up and running. No matter what, my business should be up and running. This is the main criteria that I do have. So, what if I create four servers, and what if I create these four servers out of four different machines or four different physical servers that are running in the backend? So, this is the concept. So, this is what I am getting into. And this particular concept is known as, or this particular infrastructure design is known as high availability. Let's say high availability, HA. A very, very popular interview question is that how do you design a high availability and etc. That's what we do out here. So let's see what actually gets into it. Let's see basically what we need to look into while designing something known as high availability. What are the factors we need to consider? What are the components basically that can help us in order to achieve this? So just before we begin, any questions, guys? Anything here? Is this fine? Is this context fine on what we are going into and etc.? Any questions? Anyone online, offline? Okay, so let me go into the portal and let me start creating a resource group and then creating a virtual machine inside. So let's say a demo RG here, and let's say ECS2 or Central US or any region as such. And going inside the resource group, I am now saying okay, fine, create, and I'm now saying create a virtual machine. So everything that we did yesterday or we've been doing over a period of time, I'm just doing the same thing out here. So I'm just saying create a virtual machine, and I will say okay, fine, I want a virtual machine in, let's say, Central US region of a type called Windows Server 2019. But one thing out here that I want to address out is this particular option known as availability options. It is okay, fine. You know what? We understand the fact that the physical servers can go down. That's the reason we are giving you an option known as availability options. And by default, the value that goes in here is called no redundancy infrastructure required, or no infrastructure redundancy is required. Meaning, redundancy is nothing but replication, meaning multiple copies. So by default, I'm saying, okay, fine, I don't need multiple servers in the backend. I am good with one server. But let's say again, if I want to design a high availability out here, there are a couple of options. Now you have something known as availability zone. You have something known as virtual machine scale set, which we'll be talking at a later point in time. And you have something known as availability set. Now let's go into something known as availability set out here. And I selected availability set here. And as and when I selected it, it's saying there is no availability set in this particular resource group or in this particular location. There is no item available. I'll say, okay, fine, create a new one. And right now it says, okay, fine, you know what? I can create a new one. So can you please give me the name of the availability set? So I'm just giving a name known as AV set sample. So I'm just giving a logical name to it. And then you have something known as fault domains and update domains. Now, what do they mean? What exactly do I get when I go for this and etc.? So let's do one thing. Let's say two fault domains and three update domains. Guys, if you're not speaking, can you please go on mute? So I am now just telling, or I'm just telling that okay, fine, I need two fault domains and three update domains in this particular availability set. Now let's understand what this is, and I'll say okay. So let me go ahead and create this machine firstly. So I just selected something known as availability set. Then I selected okay, fine, create a new availability set, inside which I had an option called fault domain and update domains, wherein I said okay, fine, I need two fault domains and three update domains, and the rest of the creation procedure is the same. So I'll say okay, fine, user, then I'll say this, me given the password and etc. And let me open up the ports like 80 and 443, and the rest is the same, not touching anything. So the rest is the same. Again, I'm just switching up the boot diagnostics. I'll say review and create this out. So apart from the infrastructure option where I selected, I went ahead and said, okay, fine, I need an availability set. Apart from this, the rest of the options were the same. I'm just going ahead and creating a Windows Server 2019 in, let's say, a region called Central US. Now what happens is this. You might have many data centers in Central US. I'm just talking about one particular data center wherein I have multiple servers, but I'm just considering somewhere around 6 servers right now. So I'll just say I'll have a logical arrangement here. Let me put 3 more servers here. And right now I am creating a virtual machine, and I am saying, okay, fine, this virtual machine needs to be created out of a data center in Central US, and I need 2 fault domains and 3 update domains. Now, firstly, let's understand what is fault domain. Now, fault in, let's say, if I convert it into a simple English, it's crack. Okay, faults are called cracks. In English, let's say the literal translation of fault is nothing but a crack, meaning if there is a physical wear and tear of a machine, Microsoft does a logical arrangement of this machine in such a way that, let's say, let's give an order to this machines. Let's say this is machine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Microsoft says 1, 2, and 3, these 3 machines belong to one particular fault domain called F0. So I am just naming it called F0. 4, 5, and 6 belong to another fault domain known as F1. Now these 3 machines, 1, 2, and 3, which belong to a fault domain called F0, are attached to one particular power source called P1. Meaning you will have a switch, you will have a power source, and etc. So you will basically have a power source known as P1 out here. And 4, 5, and 6, which belong to a different fault domain called F1, are attached to a different power source called P2. So machines belonging to the fault domain F0, which is 1, 2, 3, are attached to a power source called P1, and they have, let's say, their own heating, their own cooling systems, and etc., their own router switches and all that stuff. So all the physical components that you can imagine for a machine to have, 1, 2, and 3 will have one separate dedicated physical infrastructure like switches, like routers, and etc. 4, 5, and 6 will be attached to a different power source, a different router. It will have its own cooling, ventilation, and all that stuff. So meaning these set of machines, let's say in some cases, let's say the power source P1 has some issue. It's going down or it went down. In this case, 1, 2, and 3. These 3 won't be available. These 3 servers won't be available out here. But you have these 3 things, which are 4, 5, and 6, that are attached to a different power source, which will still work. They still do work. So Microsoft, what it's doing right now is that these are just 6 servers, but in a data center, you can have many servers. So it's categorizing the server in the form of, let's say, the fault domains. And it says, okay, fine, servers belonging to one particular fault domain will be attached to one particular power source, one particular physical infrastructure, so that just in case if my power source 1 is going down, I have another power source 2 which is like coming up, which is there, and I at least have like about 3 servers that are running at any given point in time. That is about fault domain. which I am talking about physical failures, or let's say something like the power source going down, the server is going down, all that stuff. There is something also known as update domains when we selected or when we were trying to create something like called the availability set. So let's talk about also the update domain. Not exactly update domain is that, let's say, the horizontal arrangement is known as a fault domain. This is what I'm telling you. The vertical arrangement right now is known as an update domain. So I'll say this is U0, this is update domain 0, update domain 1, and update domain 2, U2. And in my case, machine 1 and 4 belong to this particular update domain, U0. Machine 2 and 5 belong to another update domain called U1, and machine 3 and 6 belong to another update domain called U2. And these are machines which can have, or which basically has softwares installed, a lot of things installed on top of it. Microsoft also needs to manage them in the backend, meaning it has to regularly update them and etc. So whenever I'm updating, there will at least be somewhere around 15-20 minutes of a downtime, meaning when I'm updating the servers, when Microsoft is updating the servers in the backend, Microsoft will first go to update domain 0. It will update 1, 4, and whatever servers that are there in this particular domain. In this particular point in time, 1 and 4 will not be available because you are patching the servers, so it might take somewhere around 15-20 minutes for the servers to come back again. Servers that are falling under this particular rack will not be available, but servers that are there in update domain 1 and 2 are still available. So there are at least 4 servers that are available at any given point in time. And after the update is done to U0, Microsoft will now go to U1, update these out, then go to U2, update these out. So this is called as an incremental update. So what Microsoft tells is that, you know what, in order for your applications to be protected from fault failures or update failures, please make sure to select a combination of a fault and an update domain of your choice depending upon your architecture. Now in my case, I selected two fault domains, meaning I'll get F0 and F1, and I selected three update domains, U0, U1, and U2. And now I am saying, okay, fine, please create my machine, or please create my virtual machine in the availability set of a two fault domain and a three update domain combination. So what Microsoft is going to do is that, okay, fine, it'll say, okay, fine, virtual machine 1 is here. I'll go ahead and take this virtual machine and put it on, let's say, the server 1. So let's say, let's take this out and let's put it here. So I'll say, okay, fine, I'll provision this particular virtual machine out of this particular server 1. Now this virtual machine belongs to a fault and update domain combination of F0 and U0, right? Because this is F0 and this is U0. So this virtual machine is now called in Microsoft terminology as F0 and U0. So F0 and U0, because it belongs to an update domain called U0. It belongs to a fault domain called F0. Now great, we have provided this out. Now what I'll do is like just go to the portal right now, and this should have been created. And if you look at the creation steps out here, the first thing that ever got created was the AV set sample. Meaning, firstly, you have the availability set that is getting created, and then the virtual machine is being created and then allocated to that particular availability set right now. So what I'll do right now is that great, using this particular concept, now I'm saying that, okay, fine, the virtual machine 1 belongs to an update domain called U0 and the fault domain called F0. I will now say, okay, fine, one virtual machine is great but not sufficient. I'll now start creating another virtual machine. So I'll say, okay, fine, I'll create multiple servers to protect my application. And now I'll say, okay, fine, create a virtual machine in the same region, in the same virtual network. And now I'll say this is virtual machine 2. So I'll say it is VM2, and I'll say this is central US. and I'll just take the same size and the same configuration and etc. But right now, what I'll do out here is that I'll again go into the availability options while creating this particular virtual machine, and I will say that okay, fine, I need the availability set, but this time I won't create a new one. I will use the existing. Meaning this availability set is giving me somewhere around 2 cross 3 combination, wherein I can arrange servers into this particular availability set. And now I'll say okay, fine, just go ahead and say give the ID, password, and etc. So the same thing again. So again, RDP, HTTP, and HTTPS. These are the three ports that I'd like to open up. Management, I'll just switch this off. I'll say advanced. I'll say review and create. Now this virtual machine, which I am creating right now, I'm using the same availability set that I have, let's say, created earlier. Now this virtual machine will technically go and set in something like this particular server, which is a combination of F1 and U1. So this virtual machine will now be called as F1U1 because it belongs to a fault domain of F1. It belongs to an update domain of U1. So since this is Facebook, it's not just one server or two servers. There are multiple servers that are running out. So let's say I create multiple servers out here using the same availability set. So all these servers are placed technically in this way. They are spread across the combination. They're spread across the physical servers, and they set something like this. So I create identical virtual machines. I have the identical code running on top of all the virtual machines, and I spread them across the availability sets right now. And I have like about 6 virtual machines. This will be called as F0U0. This virtual machine is called as F1U0. This is called F0U1, and this is called F0U2, and so on and so forth. So this is now the naming convention what Microsoft now gives to the backend virtual machines. Now let's imagine that the power source P1 is going down. Your server 1, server 2, server 3 will not be available at that point in time. All of them will go down because of a mechanical failure. So let's eliminate all these things out. So these are not available, but these three are available. Your application is still running, your application is still up. You don't even have to do a disaster recovery or an ASR at this point because you still have three servers that are running and basically helping you out to basically fetch your application out. Now, at the same time, when the power source went down, Microsoft imagined that it's doing an update to U0, meaning even this server is not available, even the F1 U0 is not available. But even at this point, I still have two servers that are running at a combination. So at any given point in time, Microsoft says, okay, fine, if you have this particular combination, there will be at least two servers or at least one server that is running, and this will help you out, let's say, to give the applications to the user, or let's say to display your application to the user. So this is what Microsoft is actually talking about. So any questions till here, guys? Anything till here? I'm sorry. Availability, if the availability set can go down when the entire data center goes down. Like let's say if this is the data center, that's a good question. This is a data center. If the entire data center is going down, meaning the data center is flooded or there's some kind of a natural catastrophe out there, this availability set will not even come into picture because your entire data center is going down. That's the reason Microsoft says that if you're going for an availability set, I will give you an SLA, meaning I'll give you a guarantee that your applications are up and running for 99.95% of times. Let's say if you also want to stay protected from, let's say, the entire data center disasters, there is another option known as availability zone, wherein you can create virtual machines across different data centers. So that if even one data center is going down, there will be, let's say, a second data center or third data center that's coming to help you out. LRS, GRS, and etc. Correct. Any more questions here, guys? So let me do one thing. Now I have two servers right now. Let me go inside my resource group and let me see, or let us see what are all the resources that got created. Let's say group by type. Firstly, you have the availability set. Very importantly, you have the availability set. So let's go inside it. And this availability set has a 2x3 combination, two fault domains and three update domains, two virtual machines running out of it. VM1 is running from fault domain 0 and update domain 0. VM2 is running from, let's say, fault domain 1 and update domain 1. Right? Now I'll say, okay, fine, great. Since this is there, I'll just go back into my resource group. Sorry, into my resource group. So I have the availability set again, and then I have two disks, one each for my virtual machine. So these are two OS disks out here. I need two NIC cards. I have two NIC cards. I have two NSGs. I could have actually gone for just one NSG, so not a problem. So I have two NSGs out here. Then I have, let's say, two public IPs, one for virtual machine 1, the other for virtual machine 2. Then I have two virtual machines and one virtual network. Right? These are the combinations, or these are, let's say, all the resources that I ended up creating. So let me do one thing. Let me go into virtual machine 1, do an RTP into it, install IIS, and have a sample code on top of it. So let's go here. In order to do an RTP again, I'm taking the public IP of the virtual machine. I'm saying remote desktop connection. And I'll say more choices. Let's say use a different user. I'll say test user. And I'll do a Microsoft hyphen this is one. So I'm just logging into the machine, installing IIS and etc. So I'll log into both the machines parallelly. So I have two virtual machines. So I'll log into both of them parallelly and install the IIS. So once this is coming up, let me go into the virtual machine 2 also. And let me also go ahead and install the IIS on top of it. Let's use test user again and then go into the virtual machine service. Now, since the first virtual machine is already loaded, I'll just say close and I'll say add roles and features. And I'll say I need one particular feature out here known as web server IIS. This is the feature that I want to install because I now want to convert the server into a web server. So I'll say this is the feature that I want to install and I'll say next. I'll say next. I'll say next and then I'll just install this out. So I'm just installing this particular feature out here, which is known as a web server IIS. And once this is being installed, I'll also go ahead into my second virtual machine. I'll say yes. And I'll also start installation on this virtual machine also. Yes, it'll just take a minute. So once this is loaded, I'll just go ahead and install the IIS feature on the second virtual machine also out here. So let me give it a second. And once this is done, I'll just go ahead and add rules and features. I'll say next, next, and say next again. I'll say web server IIS, the same thing what I did in the server one. I'll say next, next, and then install this out. So I'm installing IIS on both the servers. So even this will take some time and etc. Now the plan of action is that after I install the IIS, I will be getting a folder known as inetpub, right? I will be getting a folder which is called inetpub, inside which I have another folder known as site, inside which I have another folder known as, let's say, www root, inside which I had an image called iisstart.html, which is helping me convert this entire virtual machine into a web server. So when we did a demo, let's say on IIS, what did we do is that we installed IIS, we went into that folder, we took some HTML code content, put it inside it, and we were trying to see whether it's like, coming on the online, I mean, coming, let's say, in the front end. So in the virtual machine one, the servers is installed. So if I go into, let's say, something called the C drive, I have this folder called inetpub. This is what I'm actually looking at. This folder came into picture because I installed IIS on top of it, because this is how I'll create a web server. So I'll say, okay, fine, great. Since there is inetpub here, let me go into www root, and these are two files basically that is helping me convert the server into a web server. So I'll just say, take the server out, or let's just take this IP out, and I'm able to see this image called IIS server and etc. So what I'm going to do right now is that I'll go into VM1 and I'll just create a new file out here. I'll say, okay, fine. I'm just writing some HTML content here. So the way I write it is open and close brackets h1, which is heading 1, and I'm just saying this is server 1 running from east US, sorry, running from central US, and I'll just close these brackets out. And now I'll just say file, just say save as, and I'll say documents, all types, all files. I'll say this default.html. So I'm just saving a HTML file out here, and this is how it look like. Now I can just delete this new text document. I don't need this out. Now if I go into my VM1 and I say / default.html, this is the content that's getting displayed. So even if any one of y'all can, even if anyone basically in any part of the world will take this URL and hit this out, this is the content they'll be looking at. I'll do the same thing for my server 2 also. My server 2 also has been done, like the IIS installation is done. So I'll go into my server 2 right now. I'll say inetpub root folder. Again, I'll just say create a new file here. I'll say same thing, h1, but this time I'll say this is server 2 running from east US, sorry, central US. And close this bracket, and I'll now say, okay, fine, save as, and I'll just save this as a HTML document. So I have this document as default.html, so I can just go ahead and delete this notepad out. Now if I take this server 2 IP and do the same logic out here, this is server 2, or basically I get the similar content out here right now. So this is what I have right now. I have a server 1 wherein I put some code. I'm imagining that this is a code of, let's say, a big retail website. So this is a sample code that we do have, and whatever code that you have in this particular folder will be displayed, whatever HTML content, JS, CSS files, whatever it is, this will be displayed right now. Now I'm saying, okay, fine, this is VM1, great. It has the same code. It's running from an IP called something like this. So this is the IP address of the virtual machine 1. Let's put it here. And I have a VM2 which has the same code, similar code. So because Microsoft has recommended that I run this from an availability set. I created an availability set out here, and I'm running these machines out here in that way. So I'll say this is a similar code out here, which is in VM2, and see this out, and I'll just paste it out here. Same thing out here, and both of these machines are running from an availability set. So let me talk about an AV set sample. So our sample was called AV set sample or AV sample, something like this. And both the virtual machines are running from this particular AV sample because I wanted at least one machine basically to be available in any unfortunate event. Now the question is that my application is ready, I'm all good, even the code is there, IIS installed, everything is now ready, up and running. Now the point is that the user is coming in. Which IP should I give it to the user? Is it the virtual machine 1 or is it virtual machine 2? Anyone, any guesses out here? Because you have now multiple servers, right? Now the thing is that how do you manage the traffic right now? To which server do you divert the user to? Is it virtual machine 1 or is it virtual machine 2? So anyone, any guesses out here? Anything here? Because this is a logical question, right? So I have like multiple servers. So Microsoft said, please go ahead, create multiple servers. I did that. Now I have multiple servers running the same code. They're all up and running. So now the question is that then how do I manage the user now? The user is coming in. Should I give him this IP or should I give him, let's say, the IP of the virtual machine too? Because both of them have the same code. Now let's say I give the IP of the virtual machine 1. I say, okay, fine, please go ahead, take this out so that you can get diverted to virtual machine 1. Let's say virtual machine 1 goes down. Do I now not have to give the entire world the IP to, telling that okay, fine, you know what, my virtual machine 1 is going down. Please use this IP right now. No one will be really interested to actually, kind of change the IP and kind of visit your website and all, right? So any ideas here, like what can be done to enhance this architecture? Anything? Anything? Anyone?
For our IP address, so shall we provide alias names like
Hmm.
normally what is the content on that? So like that.
Hello.
Alias names, like our DNS name. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
That is a good option. That let's say is a good option, but let's say so the answer. I mean, the one of the suggestions was that let's say I take IP1, I take IP2, assign them a same alias name. Like let's say take a name called xyz.com and I say okay fine, IP1 and IP2 basically are belonging to the xyz.com. But now I don't have a control on which IP or where this particular, let's say something like this xyz.com. I take an alias name like this and I attach my IP1 and IP2 to the alias name. But in this case, I don't have any control whatsoever on which server the user is going on to. Let's say in my case, if I do an alias name, great, but the VM1 is going down, but this user for some reason is going to the VM1 and getting an error telling that the application is not available and all that stuff. Okay. So this is an issue. Meaning if I do an alias name, great, yes, you will have to do an alias name because you just cannot give an IP to a user. But right now you cannot control the user that in which VM he should go because my intention is that he should always be diverted into the VM that is healthy. Right? This is what is my intention. So any more thoughts
Lo-
here? Anyone? Hmm?
yeah, load balancer we are using that.
Okay. So load balancer. Okay. Fine. So since that you got that, so let me talk about it. The suggestion here is to have a load balancer. Yes, that's the right answer. But what exactly is a load balancer? The thing is that isn't it great if I can have some device here which can take the incoming request and divert the request to a machine that is healthy, to a virtual machine that is in the backend which is healthy. If this is done, then I am good because I'm diverting my traffic accordingly and etc. This is where something known as a load balancer comes into picture. A load balancing mechanism. These are called load balancers. And the only work of a load balancer is to understand which machine is healthy and then divert the traffic accordingly. And this load balancer will have a public IP. This is a public IP that I will give it to my users. And since this is the public IP I'm giving to my users, the user will first visit the load balancer, and the load balancer will manage these servers that are sitting in the backend. This is the idea, or this is the concept what we are getting into. So let's say look at what load balancing services. So let's go into a load balancer. So I'll say okay, fine. Since that I know what a load balancer right now is, I'll say load balancer, and I'll say create a load balancer. And now I'll say okay, fine. I just want the load balancer inside the same resource group as my virtual machines are, which is demo RG. And then I'll just give a name to my load balancer called load balancer demo or something like this. I'll say this is Central US. Very importantly, the load balancer and the virtual machines should be in the same region. Load balancers are regional devices. They should be in the same region. There is an option known as standard and basic. Firstly, I'll go ahead and do a basic load balancer. So I'll say a basic load balancer. I'll say this is a public load balancer because I am basically a public website. People are visiting me. It's a public load balancer. And this is a regional load balancer, meaning you cannot have virtual machine running in North Europe and attached to this load balancer. All the load balancer, the virtual network, the virtual machines have to be in the same region. That's the thumb rule. I'll say okay, fine. And I'll say next. And I said that this load balancer has a front end IP configuration, meaning this load balancer will have a public IP. This is the public IP what I'll configure here in something known as front end IP configuration. I'll say okay, add, and I'll say the front end name is something like load balancer IP. Like I'm just giving a name out here. And I don't have a public IP address, so I'm just selecting a public IP and I'll say this is load balancer IP address, and I'll say it's a dynamic assignment, and I'll say okay, and I'll say add. So I'm not creating the actual IP, but I'm just telling the service that whenever you're being created, please go ahead and create an IP out here. Next, very importantly, the backend pools, meaning I'm creating a load balancer service, great, but what are the servers that this load balancer has to manage? In my case, I have a VM1 and VM2, and I add those servers into something known as a backend pool. So I'll say, okay, fine, add a backend pool. And I'll say, okay, fine, the backend pool name is something like pool A. I'll say the virtual network is the only virtual network that I got in Central US, just the one. I'll say this is associated to virtual machines because in the backend I have virtual machines basically. So please go ahead and do the virtual machine out here. I'll say add, and I have two virtual machines, VM1 and VM2. I'll just select both of them and I'll say add. Finally, I'll say add here. So I'm adding the virtual machines into the backend pool. I can add multiple virtual machines out here. I'll say inbound rules, meaning now the load balancer is asking me, okay, great, you know what? I have a front end IP configuration. I have, let's say, the backend pool to which I need to divert. But can you give me a rule onto how should I divert the traffic? Like at let's say, what is, let's say, the logic that I need to follow to divert the traffic? So I'll say, okay, fine. Please go ahead, take this rule. And I'll say add an inbound rule. I'll say the rule name is something like rule A, wherein I'm saying whoever visits the load balancer IP or whichever user visits the load balancer IP, please divert them, or whoever visits the load balancer IP at a port called AT, internet traffic, which is HTTP. Please divert them to a backend port called AT to a backend pool called pooled A. I'm configuring a rule in such a way that whoever visits this particular load balancer at a port called AT, meaning a port 80 can only happen if you're coming from the internet over a HTTP traffic. So if you hit the load balancer at a port called 80, please divert them to a pool. I'm not talking about a machine right now. I'm talking about a pool of machines. I'm saying pool A, which has two machines, and please divert them to a port called 80 on the backend pools also, because right now my machines are listening on port 80. They have basically configured, they have the IAS configured, and they're listening constantly to traffic coming on a port called port 80. I say, great, not a problem. This is the mechanism that I need. So this is what I'm adding right now. And finally, it's the load balancer is now asking me that, okay, great, you know what? I'll manage it, but can you give me something known, or can you create something known as a health probe, using which I can regularly check this virtual machines that are running in the backend to understand whether they're healthy or not. Because this is, let's say, the balancing mechanism. I'll say yes. The name of the health probe is something like health probe 1 or health probe sample. Protocol, let's say, is TCP. And I'm telling, okay, fine, please check the machines on a port called 80, because the port 80 is what the machines are using in order to expose the traffic to the internet. And I'll say, please check them for every 5-second interval. For every 5 seconds, please check them. And if they fail to respond for 2 consecutive time, if the machine, any machine fails to respond 2 times consecutively, please consider it to be unhealthy and remove it from the pool, so that you can only divert the traffic to the available machine. And the machine will be unhealthy if the backend infrastructure is going down. So I'll say okay, and I'll say add. And finally, I'll say review and create. I don't need any outbound rules and etc. I'm configuring A, the front end IP configuration, B, the backend pools, C, the health probe. Finally, I'll say create. This will now end up creating a load balancer service, attach the virtual machines to the backend pool of the load balancer service, and also create a front end IP configuration to the load balancers out here. This is all the services, or this is all the resources, what this will create. And what is going to happen right now is that this load balancer now will have a public IP. You can use this public IP to communicate with virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2. And you can now start, let's say, seeing how the load balancer will act out. Now, this is an assignment for you all. Please create a load balancer service. Please tell me, after you create a load balancer service, what is happening to the IP1 and the IP2? How are they behaving? And please use this IP of the load balancer. So since that you have a default.html page out here, you'll use a load balancer IP / default.html to see which server is responding. Is it VM1 or is it VM2? And if VM1 is going down, so how do you simulate, let's say, a failure condition? Please switch off one of the machines. Please stop one of the machines and see how the load balancer is acting up. Okay, so this is the assignment for you all, and we'll discuss it again in tomorrow's class. That how the load balancer behaves, what is a standard load balancer versus a global load balancer, and etc. Any questions for today, guys? Anything for today? Anyone? Anything? So I have a load balancing service, and this is what I want you all to do. So let's go into the front end IP configuration of the load balancer. You have an IP address which is 168.161, something like this. Take the IP.
Sir,
Just a second, please.
hello.
Just a second. This is saying server 2. Now if I switch off server 2, it will now give the traffic for server 1. So if I go into server 2 and say stop server 2, if I have a server 2 out here, and server 2 is going down right now, and it's still loading from my cache, so I'll just go into another browser. It's coming from server 1. So this is how load balancers will act. So I want you to do a demo on this. See, or basically do this particular demo. See what is happening to the IPs of the virtual machines. Okay. Yes, someone had a question.
So, high availability meaning? What is high availability?
Sorry.
What is the high availability?
High availability meaning, what do you mean by availability?
Yeah.
Meaning something should be available, right? High availability meaning at least one server should be available at any given point in time. This is called high availability.
Okay.
Any more questions here, guys? So please do this demo. Let me know what do you understand or what do you, let's say, understand by this demo, and we'll discuss it tomorrow. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.